I'm Rebecca Lowery, Associate Curator at MoCA. I'm joined by guest curator Ali Subotnick and the guest of honor, artist Tala Madani, whose show you are in the midst of right now. Just a little note, make sure please to be, those who are standing, cognizant of where your body is in relation to the many paintings on the wall. We want to make sure that they survive quite unscathed.
I think there's more chairs coming too, right?
And there are more chairs.
There's more chairs coming.
If needed. Anyway, okay, welcome to the first program on the first public day, opening of Tala Madani's first career survey in North America. There are about 136 works on view total in this show. It's enormous. Takes you from early days, 2005 is the earliest, right up to the present day. August 2022, I think there's some paintings. The date from essentially now. So we're just going to have a little conversation about Tala's practice and whatever we want to talk about. And please feel free to ask questions.
Should we introduce ourselves? I'm Tala, obviously. This is,
I'm Ali. We did not prepare, so we're going to wing this.
Or we've been preparing for about 4 years,
right?
Or a year at least together.
I mean, that might be an interesting way to start. So 2017 was when the show was originally initiated. How has it changed since then? Not just the curators working on it, but...
Yeah, so we as a group have been working on the show for about over a year. Like you said, a year and a half. The show started... we talked about it obviously 2017, and then COVID obviously pushed a lot of things back. But it's great because, well, Geffen, obviously with MoCA you have the Grand and you have Geffen, and they both have very different histories. They have different attitudes and different sort of textures. So the time that we had to think about it, and through COVID also gave me an opportunity to really think about or project on how these works would work in this space. And because it's a very typical LA building in terms of a lot of LA artist studios can look like this, with the sort of wood ceilings, light coming through, high ceilings. It has a sort of industrial look, the Geffen. So this idea of playing with height became quite fun and interesting, and changing the spaces of Geffen, so you go from one experience to another experience to another experience. Obviously, I make very small paintings and very large paintings, so how do you give you a kind of an intimate experience and then some space to, eat up the large works?
So some of those largest works are your largest paintings to date, right, that you've ever made, the Cloud Mummies series. Yeah. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
So, I'm not sure if you've all had a chance to see the show. The Cloud Mummies are the very end, end or at some position in the kitty corner to where we are now, cross-section to where we are now. They were born out of a painting that I did a long time ago, and it was sitting in the... We don't have clouds in LA very often, right? This is an anomaly for us this week. And one day when there was a cloud, I painted a cloud in a tiny canvas and left it by the side of my studio, and just enjoyed to have just captured that little cloud that appeared that day. And as you can see, that didn't quite go in the vernacular of my work, this idea of a cloud. And part of the thing that I'm really interested in to think, what doesn't get close to me or what I think about, and then how can I actually get close to it? So what is the farthest thing that I could imagine being like sort of relevant to my interest? And then what is the connection? How can I actually enter it? So as that sat for a few years, one day I decided to kind of pretend it had a window and draw on top of it. And that allowed for me to think about how I could paint a landscape, how the landscape could also become flat. And then, of course, now we had the MoCA building and the scale to actually paint a sky. I mean, so I kind of was interested to give a bit of sky to a viewer. The idea of the Cloud Mummies was a natural thought as I had been painting the sort of Ship Mom series. Clouds became another option as they opened up this other way of representing the female figure without defining it. so I'm very uninterested in defining the female form as has been defined over centuries, to kind of make it amorphous. We can talk about these in a second, right? These ones are prints in a way, so I don't have to define them. They're sort of apparitions in a way. But so the cloud is open, it's undefined, it becomes malleable, and that worked, basically.
And you can project on them, which is a big part of your work.
Whatever you want to do, yeah. And their desire, and then they're graffitied over, which is even more, yeah.
The graffiti was one thing. An artist friend of ours had this experience the other night where she started crying in front of them, and she was saying they're trapped. And I think she was thinking about children being trapped behind a window looking out, and that's what the drawings are. And I thought that was such an interesting take. And you saying that it was sort of like, yeah, behind a window, and the fact that you did them with your finger was really where you put your twist on them, like you said. Yeah,
that's interesting. I mean, reactions are amazing, and they're a gift for any artist. That's a big one. That was a big laugh on a microphone. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, without projecting too much for what an audience should think, how they should feel it, I wouldn't want to say that that's sort of the way you should look at those works or read them per se. But that there is this reality of the minute you paint anything, you trap it.
Exactly.
The minute you sort of freeze it, you're already trapping something. So think long and hard before you do that. You know what I mean? Or
but
trap
then you
appropriate
have
things.
These clouds that are amorphous, and anyone can see anything. They're like a Rorschach, so it still has this freedom at the same time, and it's still changing.
Exactly.
While it's fixed.
That idea, the fact that they could still change,
Exactly.
that they're like air, they're poof, right? And that idea of putting the figure within that temporality was also interesting.
Yeah.
However much you want to kind of turn the cloud into some kind of a milking reality, you know what I mean? So that all went into it. As we're talking, please, if there's anybody that wants to sort of we can pass the mic around too. Yeah, just, offering that up. But
yeah, and clouds are such a great, I mean, the Shit Mom series, if you haven't been through the show yet or are not familiar with that series, they were sort of your first real essay into representing a female figure without painting a female body, right? And the position of shit, in our society is sort of endlessly malleable as a material, of course, for you, as rendered in paint, but its valences, its meanings, they are manifold, and a lot of them are suppressed. So the clouds are kind of a gentler version of something that is so malleable. Of course, a cloud in a sky is always changing shape and moving. The paintings fix it in time. But for me, that new look at motherhood suggests, in the form of a cloud, the way that this idea of motherhood, that is so full of cultural projections and values, is actually a truly unfixed one, that everyone feels differently about a mother depending on where they stand, right? There's nothing that it actually is besides, describing a biological function, but the sort of idealized motherhood or mother is not something that exists in reality, right? And so the clouds are a perfect projection surface for those ideas.
Absolutely, and also this idea of the scale of a painting, for me, is always attached to some idea of the ego of the work. And if you can all imagine a Shit Mom painting of that scale would be a disaster, right? That would not be kind of what I would want to, that would not be something that I would want to play around with. And so the idea of the clouds, you could go as big as you want with a cloud, and you could have a very large, that sort of, we don't question that. And I wanted that scale for the cloud mummies without the trouble that any other material would give me, in a sense. So scale has to be quite felt out, in a sense. But to your point, as you can see through the sort of chronology of the show that we made, I didn't paint any female figures until I embarked on the series behind us, which are the Abstract Pussy series. And those, I kind of allowed myself to do them psychologically because they are actually silk screens, they're prints, so that I could just see them as reproducible material as opposed to meditated drawings, in a sense. And there are, of course, reactions to ambiguity and misunderstandings about the female forms.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about your resistance to depicting
sure.
female form?
I mean, the female form is the most painted subject, probably, in art history, especially the Western art history, that's for certain. And when I became really interested in painting the figure and becoming loose with it, it sort of read as a male figure unless you were to sexualize that blob by including breasts or hair. Otherwise, it would just simply be read as male. So I allowed it to be read as male as opposed to sexualize the abstraction. And there was a resistance for me to the comedy route, the sort of caricature route that I was going to bring the female figure into that. And I guess to some extent it is about making it a bit resistant to definition. That I allow them, the ship moms or the cloud mummies, they can stay there because they do also reject definition.
And there's also the flipping the script, in that you put the men first and the men are the butt of the jokes, but then we end up with the new landscape where you really flip the script. Can you talk about that piece?
So this piece that you enter the show with, we're in this moment of ass worship on some level, and this idea of imagining light coming from all sorts of impossible places, and this offering, and I so so
I call it an ass halo.
Yeah, right. So the painting was, about this sort of offering. What would you offer an ass? What would the ass want? And so it went from there. But it was interesting because a lot of people, and I'm sure a lot of people here, read it as a female figure, and I intended it as a male one. I was really trying to get, sorry for my language, but the male. What is the geologic? What is the
balls?
Thank you. Yes, I was trying to paint them ever so correctly, the testicles, and so, but it's interesting but culturally we're so much more prone to seeing that position for a female figure. So I was kind of interested in the projection of that immediate. This is a woman. Read. The end. Okay. No, but please, you guys ask questions. Or please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we alluded to the abstract pussies, but I don't think we quite delved in. So, in terms of then finally approaching the female figure, and resisting definition. Here's a question that
Sure.
tries the opposite. What's an abstract pussy?
So the series is called that, and the particular painting that is I think the first one on the other wall there. And it's this group of very small male figures holding a kind of a Kandinsky-esque abstraction and excitedly pointing to she's much bigger, obviously, and her sort of under her skirt, thinking, this is. So I think it's about and this is called 3D pussy. This is prison pussy, yeah, and the other one's blurry pussy. So they all kind of have these different possibilities of misunderstandings, if you will. But I'll leave you guys to explain these ones. No, but they're plays.
Well, it brings up the idea of language, and English wasn't your first language, but your titles and just saying abstract pussy, they're so loaded, but they're also really open-ended and so much humor, and maybe talking about language.
Absolutely. Certainly, if this talk was given in my native language of Farsi, I couldn't speak so casually about these words. I'll tell you that. So there's absolutely a distancing that happens with your second language. You don't feel it as strongly. You don't. you don't feel wrong saying it because your grandmother told you, oh, good girls don't talk like that, right? So there's a freedom. There is a freedom that comes with that, and there's a freedom of reassociating and using words in a more open way as opposed to a more taught way, more prescribed way. And so there's a lot of wordplay with further education, for instance, for the blackboard paintings. I guess the paintings deal a little bit of trying to deal with my own cynicism of different cultural moments that we experience, whether through body politics or education politics, social dynamics that we deal with. So they try to kind of put them in a simple, formal, joke or satire or some way of letting us digest it and to maybe come up with something else. Yeah.
Yeah, politics within the educational sphere is quite hot at the moment. Just think about everything going on in Florida, right? These are environments that we ideally are kind of universalized, at least within a country, right? Like spaces of access and learning, but they're also spaces of ideology and indoctrination. Were you thinking about your own, Tala has 2 small children, your own kids' education in thinking?
Definitely, and this even this idea, I mean, we have it on both ends, right? This idea of that ideally we're universalize also has its problems, right? That also has its uniformity and how much to be universalized, how much do we have to, are we cutting or are we simply introducing, right? So, and how, I mean, and how global is that even, right? What is there global culture that, there's certainly pop culture that we're all, I learned, pop culture is as strong as education systems globally, right? And they fight and maybe one is stronger. So that's also quite interesting, but yeah.
And then that sort of connects with the Peter and Jane series, which is
right.
The books you read when you learned English.
Yeah, so they're Peter and Jane series, they're a Ladybird series, that they're British. They come from a British publication from, I think, pre-war, from the 30s, 40s. And
this is the grid of work on the far wall.
Right. And I did learn English using them, or at least there was an attempt to teach me English using them. And I remember seeing them, and I remember thinking, even as a child, Peter and Jane really seemed like a couple, as opposed to a brother and sister. I mean, there's something quite kind of uneasy about how together they are all the time, right? I mean, brothers and sisters aren't together that much. They don't do everything together. So there's definitely this sort of like nuclear family, and even looking at them, they were printed in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and then multiculti comes in, and all of a sudden they're trying to sort of be progressive in different ways, and so that was all really interesting too. And I guess I was thinking, in painting them, I was thinking about the economy that they set up, and they were drawn, illustrated in Britain in the 40s, and now nobody can paint like that in Europe, but people paint like that in a very facile way in Asia. And where is Asia now? Where is China? Where is it heading? And that's really interesting, again, in terms of the economy of our world. And so I asked a friend to paint them in China, actually, and so with certain empty spots so that I could interfere. So they're a collaboration in a way. And I wanted to, and my interjections were always smaller. I do use the figures also in terms of some kind of an economy of a power structure. Exactly. So, yeah.
Yeah, how are the figures relating to each other in a power struggle? That often happens in other places in your work, with the Cake Men series, which is the earliest work in the show. The small blobby men, right, sometimes with thongs on. What is their position? They're marginalized by their size, right? They're always smaller than other figures, but they also are marginalized by their mode of representation in a way, right? What's the power struggle, and who's on top?
So in a way, I think when you're looking at a painting, that painting is a world, right? So within a painting, you just enter that world and you can accept it. So within the small, let's say, cake men, I wouldn't compare them, let's say, to a larger painting of a larger figure that's out of that painting. Within the abstract pussy paintings or the Peter and Janes, obviously they're much smaller and they become almost like playthings with this brother and sister couple, for me, however, the freedom of the way that I painted them was in a way arguing for them. I mean, to me, the fascistic academic way of having to paint in a certain style becomes the kind of another defining thing about them. The small ones, there's a sense also of the desire to create an intimacy with the audience. So in the same way that when you have a book and you hold it to this distance or your phone, there's an intimacy. So the scale of them and their palette is meant to kind of make you want to almost chew them. They're almost like candy, right? They're like things that you want. Cake, right? And so that's another way of also allowing you to kind of love them. You know what I mean? They're very sort of desirable little things, hopefully. Yeah.
These figures that seem like they're having fun and just like playing with human behavior and curiosity, like what happens if I give myself an enema on a ladder? I mean, like it's just like let's see what happens when we just poke and throw things, and they're really playful and fun, and you kind of want to join the party.
For some. Definitely.
Or run the other way.
I mean, I'm always having a party with them, that's for sure. Yeah, they're, and I think it's complicated, right? They are complicated. Yeah. And I think relationships are complicated, and love affairs within society, not personal ones, but cultural love affairs are also complicated. So we want to sort of keep that complication, right? There's no interest in kind of having us all agree right now on that's the right thing, and we can celebrate that and sort of feel good about it. So the interest is definitely to kind of have a bit of openness, and like you say, curiosity. Yeah. A space to kind of scratch. Yeah.
Speaking of bedside scratch, which is over in the animations room,
right?
Several people weren't familiar with your animations and mentioned that to me last night and were blown away. Can you talk about how you transitioned into that field?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of painters, there's always a longing for the kind of audience that you get. Although I have to say this audience is amazing, but generally the audience that one gets when you're a filmmaker or a moving picture maker, that painters always have a bit of grass is greener, right, on the other side. So with that feeling, and also this feeling of its shareability, when we think we're looking at paintings on our phone, we're not. You're not seeing anything, right? You're seeing an image of something, but it's the object that will actually give you the information that the artist wanted to give you, right? You can't see a painting except for seeing the painting. So with the animations, though, they're much more directly shareable. That was my first interest. Access, right. And they also helped because my paintings I do paint very fast. So I go from one idea to the next idea quite quickly, and I was also interested in just staying in an idea a bit longer. Just to kind of, have time to think of other ideas. So starting with an animation, that's how it started. But then of course, then you start experimenting, and then the door opens.
Sometimes the wrong door.
Sometimes the wrong door opens.
The title of the animation in here.
The wrong house in here.
Right. Yeah. And then this idea of just being able to move one thing from A to B it's a great way of telling narratives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Should we open it up?
Well, let me ask you one more question.
Okay, sure. We thought we were going to have nothing to talk about.
We've been talking for a year and a half straight.
That's right.
Biscuits.
Oh, biscuits. But should we really talk about biscuits? The
I
whole
mean,
biscuits?
No.
Right.
I mean,
no, yeah.
what does biscuits mean?
Well, so biscuits is a kind of a well, biscuits. We all know what biscuits mean, right? It means biscuits, but it's a way that I saw in a children's story of how it's sort of like a censored way of cursing, I guess. Oh, biscuits. So, and my first title choice was a little bit going to clash with sort of, radio wave censorship that I think Mocha wanted to allow the show on. So I thought, okay, if we can't say that on the radio, let's do biscuits. That'll work. And it's also food, and it's a foreign food. I mean, Americans don't really say biscuits.
It kind of rhymes with the original idea.
Right,
too.
right. So biscuits was a kind of a kosher way of introducing some tame form of, or cakey form of, oh no. Yeah.
Right. It's a gentle way to be a little bit crude and
exactly.
right.
Exactly.
And I think your take on biscuits too is different from an American's take, and that also depends on where the American is from, right? What region they're in, right? Biscuits are a big part of some American culture.
And I think
right?
dog food on some level, right? like that's the American use of biscuits is more for the pets.
Well, when you go to the South, they would run you out of the
Biscuits.
South for saying that. Yeah.
Oh,
Biscuits
yeah.
are a big food staple.
I'm
right?
so sorry to anybody from the South. Yes.
But it's also a euphemism
It's a
for
euphemism.
poop.
Right.
For poop, for butts, for boobs, right? We have in Looney Tunes cartoons, it's Yosemite Sam, right, who says, like, my biscuits are burning when his butt catches on fire.
This is
right?
amazing. Yes.
So, I think it ties really well into your constant interest in polysemic idioms in
Yes.
the American language, what
Yeah.
it really means and then what it's used to mean.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just funny.
Next time you have a biscuit.
And it looks good. It works.
It
just
works. Yeah, as a written thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Should we let people ask questions
If
now?
there's anything, but don't feel forced.
Nothing.
What was the non-kosher title?
There was a
I think
few. But I always use a title from a painting usually. So now I have to make biscuits. That's going to come in the future. But it was, I think we were thinking about titchits, maybe, which is another way of saying, oh no, but happily biscuits, we came to it. It was the preferred title. Yeah, yeah.
There we go.
Please.
Are any of the animations in the show?
Yes.
Yes, you will find them through the bunker.
There's a whole room of them. There's also one here. There's one in the shit mom room. There's one on the entrance wall out here. And there's one in the very back room with the clouds. So
I think altogether maybe there's like 16 animations in the show. Yeah.
Sprinkled throughout.
don't miss them.
Yeah.
Especially Sex Ed by God.
Oh,
Any other questions? I've got a burning question for Tala.
oh yes.
Oh, hi.
Please, please. Of course.
Oh, the wallpaper.
The background.
Yeah, that's
The
right.
wallpaper, yeah.
I started painting, if you've seen the animation that's in that room, and when I was doing the animation, there were a lot of wallpapers in that animation that my figure ended up sort of defacing the wallpapers. And I made some paintings that I glued the wallpaper onto the canvas of the painting and then used it as some kind of a faux wall of a painting. And so it came from that. It came from wanting to make the room in a way like you're inside of a painting perhaps, or inside of kind of a larger space. And a desire also to give the audience a bit of a shift in their experience of the museum and the way they're experiencing the paintings. But it was very fun to do that in the museum, I have to say. Throwing paint around, it has to be now the only kind of way I show work. Yeah.
For those who haven't been in that room yet, it's a giant oversized vinyl wallpaper that Tala spent several days covering in smears of brown paint, and it was hilarious to see her coming out of that space because she was kind of in there by herself. She had to
In a
go through
Tyvek.
a Tyvek
Rubbing.
onesie just covered in brown.
That's
from
how
head to
painters
toe.
always look
Yeah.
on
But
some level.
literally rubbing the walls with brown paint. You
Well,
were
no,
shit
Carolee
mom.
Sheeman. I mean, Carolee Sheeman was one of my first moments, in studying in art, basically. So, anytime you have a chance to inch toward her experience of the way she created things, one should enter. Yeah.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Can you delve further into the
Yeah.
connotations behind shit?
So,
Read Rebecca's essay in the catalog, first of all.
of course, yeah. So for, it's. I thought I sort of had this economy. I wasn't interested in painting things. I was interested in figure painting in some kind of a space for the small ones, but not really to paint, the light or the couch or the sort of interior. So I was quite sparse with the interior or anything that the figures would have to, give insight to what I'm trying to say. So I wanted that economy of you don't know where they're living, what they have. So at some point, as I needed some things, their body became usable, whether it's sort of tweezing things from like body hair or then later on the liquid from the body or the material from the body. So that almost was akin to the paint itself, the first sort of attempts at that. And there was a story that a friend of mine, Nam Le, who's a writer from his Vietnamese Australian writer, he sent me a short story when he had written it, and it was about this this guy going and getting an enema. And in the process of the short story of the guy getting an enema, he is recalling his daughter and all of his fuck-ups, basically. And I thought how interesting as this experience is almost for a man is the closest to sort of giving birth. It's sort of like an exiting, sort of a big experience. And almost like therapy. So it became like this excavation of what is this inside thing, and let's sort of let's have an opportunity so that it can come out of you and you can look at it in the paintings. And so that was the beginning, and I think we have a wall that kind of goes through the evolution of, let's say, excrement in my paintings as the very first one, which is the whole, and then going on and on and on. And then so when it came to Shit Mom, I had already been painting this for a while and thinking about it in terms of, I hope that didn't break. And I was thinking about it in terms of, shit is also fertile material, right? It's fertile, right? It's furtive. It can grow tomatoes because tomato seeds don't digest. Bill Gates is dealing with this, right? That's what we're going to have in the moon or in space. Tomatoes. So anyway, in coming after having my son and 8 months of just looking at the back of his head, I thought I would just paint a mother and child painting and get that image out of my head and just put it somewhere in my bathroom. And as I painted it, it was so disturbing and such a cliche, such a kitsch image that I couldn't even finish it. So I started smearing it away. And happily, I didn't smear the child, but the mother figure got smeared enough that it gave me the idea of, oh wait, I could live with this. This is interesting. So Shit Mom was born out of that experience of the cliches of painting a mother and child. And again, then the openness of not defining something. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much for your
there's
attendance.
another
Oh
question.
no, there was a question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't see.
Very funny. I'm curious if you are really interested in
Are you interested in
deeply
comedy?
interested in comedy.
We laughed a lot in the last year and a half, I must say.
But I would never do comedy because it would be awful. I mean, yeah. But definitely, and I mean, I think there's really interesting to think about what is a writer, a comedian's process in relation to painting. I mean, I'm very interested in that because when a comedian performs, you believe that that's the first time they're performing it, and it's sort of the timing of it, right? And similarly with painting, it has to have that freshness of coming upon it, and so how do you negotiate that as well, right? So I think there's a lot of interesting overlaps.
And a lot of yours are sort of like one-liners in a way, but
They
then
can
they
be.
go deeper.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
title, the image at first.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But also in relation to what is comedy in our culture. What is satire, or what is Lenny Bruce's imprint on the world, for instance, and the sort of influences of his craft in terms of also resistance and in terms of pushing back is quite relevant for me. I definitely take more from writers, comedians, filmmakers than from painters for my work in terms of attitude. Yeah, thank you. Please. I mean, a zillion. The question is the historical references that I'm interested in. When you're painting, you're within the world of painting. You can't not be aware, probably not deeply interested in every moment of painting, but absolutely living within the history of painting.
And you reference it with Morris Men Pistain.
Definitely reference American abstraction or minimalism, but in a more of a political push to it, to that. Yeah. Please, yes. Oh, the cloud mummies.
How to paint such large canvases.
After painting for, 20 years, it was very exciting to set up something, to really learn something new. So I set them up, stapled them just to the wall, and then had to rent a scissor lift to reach the top, and then think how I'm going to get them out the door. And it was a process, it was a lot of processes of, but I painted them also with rollers, just the way painters paint walls. Sorry, wow. Painter paints walls, and just a scissor lift. So they were quite athletic. So the paintings became very physical. Yes, physical. That was quite exciting, just to have this new experience of doing them too. Yeah, and also like you said, with fingers and with rags, and almost doing what the paintings are doing, with washing them, and then smearing them, and then treating them like windows, in a sense. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and then there become really kind of maybe more boring but technical considerations when you're working at that scale, right? When the painting is 15 feet high, how do you get it into the building, right? You have to consider the height of your doorways. So these paintings in particular were rolled on tubes and then brought here to the Geffen to be stretched on site, at which point they were put right up on the wall.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say that we should end here. I want to thank everyone for joining us
so
in this
much.
conversation.
And thanks to the MoCA team.
Yes,
All
absolutely.
the staff that make all this happen.
Yeah, enjoy the exhibition and please come back often.
Thank you.